Mage Storytime, Episode 14, Down and Out. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Talo, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. In the week following our encounter with the marauders turned alien monsters, we mostly did a lot of studying, trying to improve our magical skills and boost them to the next level. Well, most of us were doing that. Bard and Alwi, the only two dumb enough to let the monsters close to melee, had suffered badly at the hands of the greenskin brutes, so they spent most of the week bleeding profusely and regretting their life choices. Fortunately, we had a few healers in the party, and the technocracy agents had provided basic first aid in the field, so they weren't liable to die anytime soon. Once we were safely back in our secret lair/mall shop, the healers went to work and managed to stabilize our wounded companions. That, and a visit to the ancient bodhisattva at the Celestial Chorus Chantry, managed to do the trick. Bard was a member, and she found Alwi amusing, so she agreed to heal both of them. As stated, those of us who survived the marauder attack more intact had spent the week working on our magical skills. Critical, Kitty, and Talo, though, had more difficulty than most. Whenever the three tried to contact their gods and spirits, they had more difficulty doing so than they had had in the past. Bard would have noticed this too, but was too busy being grievously wounded to pay much attention. Apparently, something was up in the spirit realms. Talo contacted Raijin, who she had somehow talked into guarding our store from malicious ghosts and spirits, and the occasional graffiti artist. He told her that something was definitely going on, but as a lightning god, he was more aligned to nature and the elements, so he didn't know much. He suggested contacting someone more associated with death and the dead, as that was where the trouble seemed to be coming from. Intent on getting some answers, Kitty decided to follow the lightning god's advice. He slipped a piece of paper with a stylized gravestone drawn onto it into the urn of cemetery dirt he carried with him, then donned a silk top hat, poured himself a stiff drink, and started smoking a cigar. It wasn't long before his ally, Baron Samedi, got the call and came through. At first we couldn't hear him. It was like there was interference on a phone signal or something. But after a few minutes of shouting, "What?" back and forth, the spirit manifested himself in a burst of smoke. We had called on the Baron because we figured he was a powerful enough spirit to make his way through whatever interference was causing problems. And we were right. When he appeared, he towered over everyone, and his avatar almost filled the whole room. "Hello, my little friends," he boomed. "How can I help you?" "You could start by turning the volume down," Kitty complained. "Sorry," the Baron said, assuming a more human size and volume. "After that explosion and the spirit quake, the gauntlet between the living world and the spirit world has gotten all messed up. It's hard to get through like normal, so I had to force it. And that meant I came through with a lot more vigor than I maybe needed." This in part explained why our spirit mages had had so much trouble contacting their allies on the other side, and why said allies had seemed bigger and louder than normal when they appeared. Weeb, who had noticed the same thing when he went to visit Coyote, had assumed it was just the trickster playing a prank. But no, it seemed to be an issue affecting everyone in the Umbra. On the bright side, none of our party screwed around with minor spirits. We had figures like the Baron, Coyote, Raijin, and a bevy of superheroes on our side. And with the belief from young children and fans, they were just as powerful, if not more so, than the gods themselves. That meant that, while we might have a harder time pulling off our magic, our allies were big and powerful enough to muscle their way through the interference and come to our aid, so we weren't necessarily helpless. It took a few minutes of us pondering this revelation before Handy picked up on an important part of what the Baron had just said. Wait, what was that about an explosion? Yeah, the Loa replied. There was this huge boom and then the quake happened. I may be paranoid, but something tells me the two were related. We agreed and said it sounded like something someone should look into. I'm so glad you agree. I knew I could count on you, said the Baron, volunteering us before we could object. All the trouble started in the underworld, the part of the Umbra reserved for the restless dead. It's called the Shadowlands, and it's not easy to get to. Well, more than once. When we pressed him on how exactly we should start our journey to the realms of the dead, the Baron laughed and said, Dying is usually the first step. But I suppose, if you're a bunch of wimps, you could just arrange for a near-death experience or something. Plus, those ways, you'll seem actually dead, and so the wraiths and specters that haunt the place won't attack you for being alive. I'm a psychopomp, which means guiding the dead is my job, so I'll be able to take you right to the epicenter of the quake. But getting out is another matter. And with that, he left us, promising to be ready to guide us to the afterlife whenever we needed him. As it so happened, we knew a group of mages who worked with near-death experiences on the regular, so we were pretty sure Kitty, the proposed applicant, could arrange something with his friends in the Euthanatos. Maybe they'd even let this count as his initiation. Getting back seemed like a problem, though. Several suggestions were made, including bringing monsters and spells from a well-known children's card game and using those to magic ourselves back to life. Since there was a heavy Egyptian theme in the game, and we knew a bit about ancient Egypt and its gods, we thought this might give us a way to contact some Egyptian death god like Anubis, who, since he was part jackal, would probably know his cousin Coyote. Maybe we could convince the jackal-headed god to give us a lift to the trickster's realm. This idea was voted Plan B on the basis that Anubis didn't seem likely to resurrect or otherwise remove souls from the underworld. It just wasn't part of his job. Finally, we settled on a slightly better plan than asking a random death god to resurrect us, pretty please. After a little bit of research, i.e. hitting a bunch of World of Darkness rulebooks and wikis and hoping like hell that it proved mostly to be true, we discovered that the digital web, where our store had a presence, including magical workrooms and storage for our more paradox-inducing ideas, ran throughout the umbral realms. Part of the web touched every realm, even the lands of the dead, so we could use that as a way back to the lands of the living. All we had to do was find the part of the digital web that connected to the underworld. Piece of cake. Well, actually, along these lines, Weeb had a fantastic idea. We learned that wraiths, the technical term for spirits of the underworld who hadn't moved on, and which we were likely to encounter, had objects that connected them to the mortal world, or skinlands, called fetters. These seemingly innocuous items were concrete representations of abstract ideas. They symbolized a particular hold or attachment the wraith had to the mortal world. Operating on this same logic, Weeb suggested we create our own fetters in the digital web as a sort of beacon. He crafted a small capsule in the center of our digital space, and we all imbued it with forces and spirit magic so that it would help light our way from another realm. We didn't think it would act like a homing signal, but it might give us an idea of which way to head. Then we all placed special items in the capsule. Tello put in her favorite book. Weeb, Critical, and Bard each put in necklaces that they wore daily as symbols of their respective faiths. Kitty put in a picture of his cats. He thought about putting one of those cats in the box, but that seemed like a bad physics joke waiting to happen. Handy put in an heirloom watch that a grandparent had given him, and Alwee put in a good luck talisman from his mother that he kept on his keychain. Having made our donations, we stood back and admired our work. Weeb's beacon would probably give us some sort of signal, and the personal nature of the artifacts meant we weren't liable to make a huge flare for any spirits that happened to be looking that way. So we decided that we were as ready as we were going to be, and as a party we set off to meet our deaths. We still brought the trading cards, though, just in case. We arrived at the Euthanatos meeting place/funeral parlor and walked in the doors. Dee Dee, who had answered our call when we phoned earlier, flapped over to meet us. I am so glad you all came back. I'm so sorry about what happened last time, with the killing and all, but I'm glad you weren't weirded out. We are so happy you're here. She really seemed to mean it. which was a bit off-putting for our group. Still, we soldiered on in the face of her overwhelming cheer. "So, when you called, you said something about the death initiation ritual we had? Kitty, did you want to join up? Only, that might be a bit of a problem right now, because apparently something's been going on of late." "Actually, that's why we wanted to talk to you," said Kitty. "See, we heard on the spirit grapevine that something happened in the Shadowlands that was causing havoc. We thought we might be able to take a look and figure something out, but we don't really want to commit mass suicide, so we thought maybe you could help." "Oh my God, that would be perfect," Dee Dee squealed in delight. "Did all of you want to go? Because we can arrange that. Since you said you were coming over tonight, I thought Kitty might want to do his initiation and made sure to bring the ritual potions. Drink it, and your spirit will leave your body and travel to the Shadowlands. We'll keep your body safe until you get back, and the potion will suppress any life energy that you give off, so the dead will think you're one of them." We spent some more time going over the details of the underworld, how wraiths operated, that they had shadows that tried to drive them to despair and depression, that some fell to their shadows and became specters, and other perils of the place to look out for. Taking the information, Alwi turned thoughtful for a few moments and then asked, "So, has anyone ever died doing this?" "Oh, all the time," Dee Dee cheerfully replied. "That's one reason we meet in a funeral parlor. Well, that and the delightful ambiance. But yeah, having graves close to hand can be very convenient at times. People get caught in the Shadowlands, or fall into oblivion and rejoin the karmic cycle, or they just get lost and can't find their way out until eventually their bodies starve to death. But I'm sure you'll be fine. And again, don't worry about your bodies. If your spirit makes it back to the lands of the living, you'll naturally kind of snap back into yourself. So all you have to do is get out, which you shouldn't have any trouble with." We weren't so optimistic, but a quick huddle produced no better ideas about how to reach the Shadowlands, so we opted to continue with the Euthanatos. Fortunately, we had all taken the time to update our wills beforehand. We moved into another room and sat ourselves on a collection of pillows. Then we were each handed a potion and, with a cry of, "Chug, chug, chug," we downed them all and laid back. The change was almost instantaneous. We lay down, only to sit back up after a moment. We all felt compelled to rise and stretch ourselves, but as we did, we saw the bodies lying at our feet. Then we looked around and noticed that we had all apparently changed. We looked like ourselves, combined with something else. Weeb had red hair instead of his normal black, and was wearing plate armor. Handy's skin had become a lot swarthier than his normal milk complexion. It was almost olive-colored and seemed to match his new toga. I couldn't even begin to describe Talo. She was some mix between herself and an elf-like creature. The effect was subtle, but just visible enough to be disturbing. And Kitty had grown fur all over his body, making his stocky frame more closely resemble a miniature creature that went, "Yep, yep." Critical was a lot more normal. He just had a bright, glowing halo hovering over his head. Alwi had a halo too, but it seemed out of place floating over his new devil horns. Finally, when everyone saw Bard, who looked like himself with the addition of a red trenchcoat, the coin dropped. We had somehow merged with our avatars. The large black man with a top hat and skull painted on his face laughed at our visible confusion. We were also confused by this, as Baron Samedi hadn't been in the room when we first laid down. But we had sort of expected him, so we all adjusted quickly. The psychopomp guided us to the door, and when it opened, we found ourselves standing on the precipice of a vast, swirling chasm of indescribable colors and substance. The Baron gestured at us to follow, then stepped into the empty air and started to float downward. We all figured we had nothing to lose, since we were technically dead already. We were wrong about that, but we followed Samedi anyway, and found that we could apparently fly. "You won't be able to do this once you're fully in the Shadowlands, but for now fly close to me and you'll be fine," said the psychopomp. We were a little unsure, until Bard flew too far out of formation and found his spiritual body being perforated by shards of plastic, wood, and metal being driven by the howling winds around us. As he limped back to the safety of the lowest presence, the dark god laughed. "Like I said, stay close. This is the Maelstrom, a storm of lost memories and destroyed fetters that have been discarded or forgotten by the dead. It's deadly on its own, and there are plenty of predators that make their home there as well. It's kind of like the oceans in that way. but it separates your world from the Deadlands. About that time, as our little bubble of calm floated through the churning metaphysical waters, Critical pointed to something in the distance. At our insistence, the Baron paused for a moment while we looked closer. It turned out to be some sort of futuristic spaceship. It seemed like something out of science fiction, by which I mean both that it seemed impossible and futuristic, but also that it followed along the same designs and engineering principles that inform sci-fi television and movies. It was both familiar and strange at the same time. We immediately decided it must be some sort of technocracy vehicle. We had heard rumors that they had some sort of outer space-focused group, and this seemed like just the sort of place a group of adventurous idiots would get stranded. We knew they were stranded, because Bard reached out to them with his mind magic, not wanting to risk getting perforated by the maelstrom again. His telepathic connection was fuzzy, but he did confirm that there were humans aboard, and that they were indeed technocrats. The Baron refused to take us closer, insisting the issues in the Shadowlands took precedence, but Bard was able to get some basic information and told the crew of the vessel that we would relay information about their plight. We told them to try to dampen down their life energy so they wouldn't be attacked by specters, and said to hold on as best they could until help came. We continued on our way for what felt like hours, until we found ourselves suddenly breaching through some clouds and coming in to land over a large, nondescript city. We couldn't tell where it was. For all we knew, it could have been the ghost of some city, but whatever it was looked rough. The gray buildings and concrete valleys would have been unpleasant enough in their own right, but apparently someone or something had laid waste to the place. Buildings were toppled, and debris littered the ground, and one massive crater cut into the base of a hill in the middle of the town. We started to fly that way, but the Baron warned us off, saying that he would have to set us down in a nearby part of town, and we would have to make the rest of the way on foot. Because reasons. We sat down on the ground, and Weeb and Handy immediately jumped into the air, trying to return to their avian existence. They were clearly disappointed when the specter of gravity reasserted itself, and they landed back on the hard ground. The Baron laughed, pointing the direction to the large crater we had seen, and then, his eyes gleaming with mirth, took to the air to the jealous cries of half the party. He wished us luck, but said that his duties, and powers, ended once we were safely in the Shadowlands. And with that, we were on our own. Feeling somewhat uncomfortable outside of our bodies, at least existentially, if not physically, we set about our task as quick as possible. We started picking our way over the fallen rubble, wondering at the size of the explosion and subsequent quake that had struck the place. Whatever the real cause had been, the damage was near total, especially in terms of human casualties. We didn't see anyone for blocks, which made the large city seem all the more eerie. When we finally turned a corner and spotted a small group of people standing about, it was almost a relief. Then we remembered what we had been told about how the dead felt about the living. Hesitant, but trusting to the Euthanatos potion, we approached and hailed them. We asked what had been going on, and one of the figures, a woman of indeterminate age, turned to us. "Didn't you hear the explosion? Or feel the quake? Oh, it was terrible. My John would have hated it. He always hated loud noises. Have you seen him?" No, sorry, we're new here," replied Critical. "Oh, well, that explains why you didn't know about the quake. It was just horrible. But since you're new, you must have been in the Skinlands recently. Did you happen to see my little Jessie? Oh, I worry so, and John will want to know that she's all right. Have you seen John anywhere?" We again replied in the negative, and did our best to end the conversation with the clearly obsessed lady. None of the other figures in the street had even noticed the conversations. They just shuffled around staring into the distance, lost in their own thoughts. We got a few more details about what happened, but nothing beyond explosion, earthquake, and maybe the idea that the explosion caused the quake. Does the spirit world have fault lines? There wasn't much new information, though, so we politely excused ourselves, saying we would keep our eyes open for John. We didn't, and continued toward this crater. It was another mile or two, I guess, who knows how distance works in the metaphysical realms, before we came across anybody else. This time, we saw a group of figures ahead in the distance, moving about with more purpose than the previous group. As we drew closer, we saw what appeared to be a young woman standing on a pile of rubble, shouting directions. You two, into that building. Look for any fallen spirits that we can help out and keep your eyes open for lost fetters. A lot of people out there hurt and alone, and we've got to help them. And if we help them get out of the rubble, then we can help them get out of this horrible nightmare realm. You lot, she said, pointing to us. You must be the help I sent for. Check those 2 buildings over there, she shouted, pointing to a nearby building with a commanding gesture. Alwee, preferring to do the bossing rather than being bossed, was about to correct her when Critical and Kitty started making high-pitched noises and pulling the other members of the party towards the doorway of the building. We all knew the "oh shit" signal, so we followed along compliantly as the 2 party members led us into the building and out of sight of the girl and her underlings. There, they helpfully informed us that the shadows around the people, and around the girl, had all seemed weird. When pressed, all they could say was that they had a spooky feeling about them. We took this very seriously for 2 reasons. 1, mages tend to have good instincts when it comes to spooky. And 2, if something about this crew was wrong enough to make them seem too spooky for the land of the dead, something must be amiss. Plus, we had heard about how shadows related to wraiths and specters, and even though we didn't know much, we decided that this girl was clearly trouble, of which we wanted none. This decided, we continued out the back door of the building and on towards the crater. Not being ones to let opportunity go to waste, however, we did a little rummaging through the many piles of rubble and debris on our walk, and managed to find a few trinkets that, despite their innocuous appearance, our mage senses informed us had some sort of mystical power. They were an engagement ring, a child's teddy bear, and a pair of antique dueling pistols. At least, we thought they were antiques, until we saw the words, "Made in Taiwan," stamped on the bottom, but they were still nice replicas. Pocketing the loot, we continued on our way. Of course, we didn't just want to walk away with a band of shadowy who-knows-whats at our heels, so we had to arrange other transportation. After a while, Weeb decided we should take to the air again, and had a quick, whispered discussion with Handy. The 2 then directed the rest of us to sit atop a large, fallen piece of concrete, or whatever the spiritual equivalent was. Handy used his Force's ability to warp the gravity around the stone, a feat made easier because we were in a mystical spirit realm. Weeb perched himself on the rear and began to blast jets of flame from his hand, and we took off, spitting defiance at the concepts of subtlety and physics. It worked perfectly, except that the heat from his hands caused Weeb's red hair to frizzle, but he ignored it and kept powering our magic brick bus. Air travel proved to be a much quicker route, and it wasn't long before we, gently, crashed into the crater we had been looking for. After a moment's consideration, we decided that whoever had set off the explosive had been rushed. We came to that conclusion because the large, glowing portal sitting on top of the hill, just past the rim of the crater, all but had the word "target" painted across it. It was the only interesting thing in an otherwise dull park space. As we pulled closer to investigate, we could see that the attack, if that was what it had been, hadn't been completely wasted. The portal was visibly damaged, with huge cracks running through the stone archway. The whirling morass of light and darkness that formed the center of the portal was occasionally lashing out, sending little flares of magical energy lancing from the gate down the path. We decided this was a bad thing and stood well to the sides. We weren't sure what the portal was, but Bard claimed he could hear a lot of screaming and howling and, just below that, the call of malevolent voices. We decided this was what we were here to fix. Fortunately for us, the party included several crafty individuals, and Weeb and Tello took a closer look at the material from which the portal was made. After much mundane and mystical examination, we were no closer to knowing what the stuff was made out of, but Weeb insisted that it had been forged, rather than cut like stone or baked like bricks. Based on this piece of information, we decided that, logically, if heat and pounding were used in the creation process, the same techniques could be used to repair the thing. So, using forces to channel heat and Weeb's divinely gifted blacksmith hammer, we set about fixing the gate as best we could. Luckily, all we did was heat up the material a bit and then pound it into a flat surface, sometimes sticking fallen pieces of masonry back into place. It wasn't too difficult to process, and we thankfully managed not to screw it up. It was while we were standing back, wiping our brows and admiring our work, that the guard force came up to us. "Halt! What are you doing here?" one shouted, as the uniformed figures lowered their pikes threateningly. "What are you doing to that Nile portal?" "Fixing it," was all Tello said, pointing over her shoulder at the still glowing seams where we had clearly been making repairs. What do you mean, fixing it? Explain yourself, or I'll... Oh. Oh, crap, you guys fixed it. Holy hell. Thank you? Our good citizenship won over the guard, and they lowered their weapons, deciding that we were at least somewhat trustworthy. They were profuse in their thanks. Apparently, the portal separated the Shadowlands from Oblivion, the realm/force of ultimate destruction that constantly threatened everything. The guards set a group of black-robed figures, some with tentacles or multiple eyes — it turns out looking weird isn't totally abnormal for ghosts — had set off a series of bombs throughout the Shadowlands at portals just like this one. This wasn't the only portal to have been damaged, and some had even been totally destroyed, but our repairs would keep this area from falling to destruction. They thanked us for our civic virtue and returned to their patrol. The mention of black-robed figures trying to blow up a device keeping the world from being destroyed made us immediately think of the Nefandi, and the mention of tentacles made us think of Cthulhu. We checked, and were later able to confirm that some of the Nefandi work with / make pacts with / worship Cthulhuoid entities from beyond the stars. More boring ones just worship demons or the worm, but there was definitely a known Lovecraftian strain to their practice, so our guesses weren't far off. We decided that this was information that the traditions needed to know about. The Nefandi were trying to blow up parts of the Shadowland, probably in a plot to destroy the world. Bard submitted that, since they tended to be more organized of the two, perhaps the Nefandi had been instigating and guiding the Marauder attacks. In our paranoid state of mind, that made perfect sense, and we decided it was time to return to our bodies with this newfound information. It wasn't as easy as just saying it, but when we turned on the locator devices that Weeb had created with our concerted help, they worked perfectly. Well, I say perfectly, but Telos shorted out and burst into flames, while Handies and Always just didn't turn on. But enough worked that we were able to find a heading. It was an uneventful walk through the rest of the city. We ran into the patrolling guards again, and they offered to escort us, so no one tried to give us any trouble. When the guard left us at the edge of town, we turned around to view the dead countryside, and in the distance we spotted a glowing, neon strand descending from the sky, and landing in the woods some ways ahead of us. It didn't take too much brain power to figure out that was our destination. And indeed, when we finally trudged our way through the woods, we did find a strand of the digital web stuck in the ground. It was about the size of a modest home, and we had no idea how to enter it. We tried pushing, we tried digging, we tried asking nicely. Finally, we remembered that we were fricking wizards, and decided to try magic. That worked a lot better, as the entire party was able to use one sphere or another to get themselves into the web. When we appeared as our digital selves, no longer blended with our avatars, we found ourselves standing on a deserted street. Boards and shutters covered the window of storefronts which offered music sharing services, downloads and uploads from strangers all across the internet, dead or dying social media sites, search engines that we hadn't thought of in decades, and all the other things the internet associates with death and decay. There was even a digital tumbleweed floating down the empty street. All in all, it was a vast difference from the busy, bustling sites we had seen in the parts of the digital web we normally frequented. Still, it wasn't too difficult to find our way from where we were to our store, especially with the help of the beacons. On our way, Weeb stopped into the spy's demise and told the first technocrat he saw about the spaceship lost in the maelstrom. The enemy agent thanked him for the info and said he would relay it to the proper authorities. And from there, it was just a hop, skip, and a metaphysical planar jump back into our bodies. When we sat up, Dee Dee applauded, welcomed us back, and handed around a tray of juice and orange slices. She said that would help us recover. Her cheery demeanor faltered somewhat when we told her about the attempt to destroy the Nile portals in the Shadowlands, and her face went pale under her white makeup. Still, she rallied quickly, and congratulated Kitty, and anyone else in our party who wanted to join, since we had all passed the initiation, into the Euthanatos. We thanked her, but said that Kitty was the only interested applicant at this time, and then made our goodbyes. We had had a busy night being dead, and we didn't want to waste time with a resurrection reception. We all broke up, planning to head to our respective traditions and warn them about the Nefandi attacks. After all, who knew what they might try to do next? What will the Nefandi try to do next? Are they really behind the Marauder attacks? And what will happen to the spirit realms? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.